Hello, and welcome to today's National Conversations, Race, Relationships, and Resources Black History Month webinar. I am today's host, Tanya Gibson, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Human Resources for Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America. This year, we are celebrating the Black History Month theme, the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. In today's discussion, I'm joined by three leaders in youth development and youth advocacy who embody this theme and each of whom have contributed to Black history within their organizations. Our three panelists for today's discussion are Big Brothers Big Sisters of America President and CEO, Artis Stevens, National Board Member for Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, Miss USA 2019, and her firm's first diversity advisor, Chesley Christ.
Thank you.
And Maryland 4-H Program Director and Assistant Director of the University of Maryland Extension, Dr. Nia Amani Fields. Welcome to today's panelists, and let's start this conversation. And so Chesley, as you just heard, this year's 2021 Black History Month theme is the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. And so the theme centers around representation, and that's where I want to start with you in today's question. It's important for Black families and particularly for Black youth to see themselves in this month and throughout the course of history day to day. What are your thoughts on the importance of representation for youth, and how does that influence your work as an attorney?
Well, it's incredibly important. To steal a phrase that my teen, Miss Teen USA, used to use all the time, you can't be what you can't see. We were constantly talking about how, we were women of color because we had 5 titles, Miss USA, Miss Teen USA, Miss America, Miss Universe, and Miss World, who are all women of color at the same time. Thank you, Dr. Fields. And, so we talked frequently in interviews about the importance of having, these titles represented simultaneously. And, one of the things that was meaningful to me was, Halloween in 2019, when little girls would dress up as Miss USA, little Black girls, and, other women of color would dress up as Miss USA, knowing that they had that opportunity to, reach that level. And, I think, so many times we don't realize that, you reaching higher is done because somebody has inspired you, because somebody is sitting in that role, and you can look to them and say, I want to be her. And that's why we need representation. That's why we need, representation, obviously, in pageantry. That's why we need it in entertainment, both in front of and behind the camera. That's why we need it in business. I think, recently Walgreens named Rosalind Brewer as their incoming CEO for March. And, when she takes on that role, she will be the only Black woman to be a Fortune 500 CEO, the only one. And I think there have only been 3 ever. And so we need that kind of representation so that women who are taking, classes to earn their MBA can say, I want to be like Rosalind Brewer, not say, I want to be the first person to enter this role, because although that's certainly possible, it's not ideal. And you want to have somebody to look to and to model yourself afterwards and to mentor you.
Absolutely. You mentioned Rosalind Brewer and her history-making, glass-shattering moment of being the only Black woman in leading a Fortune 500 company. And you have a distinction also of being probably one of very few Black women, Black leaders on a national board, be it our national board member. And so taking that a step further, when we talk about board membership and representation and what that means, talk a little bit about why representation matters to be on a board, and even specifically on a nonprofit board.
Because I think you need our voices, and you need our perspectives in leadership decisions. I think too often, we could point to tons of examples where companies, both nonprofit and for-profit companies, have taken under, marketing campaigns that have been extremely offensive to different communities because they lacked representation on the decision-making boards that released, those marketing campaigns. I think, too often, something that may be meant, that you may intend to be positive, can end up being a microaggression. Like, for example, I know that all of us in this room at some point in time have been told that we're very articulate. And, although somebody may mean that as a compliment, they may not understand that that is a microaggression. And I don't want to receive that kind of compliment. So having those perspectives, knowing, having somebody say like, maybe we shouldn't be communicating this way, or maybe that program doesn't sound like it would be successful because it sounds actually like it would be offensive to people who look like me, people who belong to my communities. And so that's why we need those kinds of voices and perspectives, especially on nonprofit boards, but certainly in other realms and industries as well.
Yeah, in other spaces, right? I think that's so important when we talk about seeing ourselves in the people that look like us. And so that's so fabulous. I want to take a step back, talking a little bit about some history moments that you've had, Chesley. I mentioned in the introduction that you hold a couple of different titles. You've made history, being named Miss USA 2019. And in that year, you actually made history in a couple of different ways. You were the first to hold that title longer than any other Miss USA in the organization's history. And also during that same time, you alluded to it, that in all of the organizations, there were 5 titles that were all held simultaneously by Black women. And so can you share with us a little bit what that felt like for you, being a Black woman holding the title with 4 other Black women in pageantry, and how that representation hopefully allows other young women, young men, and even those who identify in the non-binary community to see history being made and identifying and seeing themselves in that moment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that those wins helped was to help destroy this sense of tokenism that many of us have had to overcome. Because in pageantry and in business and the legal profession, there are so many times where high achieving women of color are the only one in the room. Where, I'd seen, women advance to the top 5 in a pageant, and, you always have the token Black girl, or, in a top 5, you have like 1, maybe 2. And that wears on your spirit as a woman competing, to think, okay, there's a handful of incredibly talented, deserving women of color, but I know that only one of us is going to make it, because that's just the way that that pageantries go. That's the way that we've seen things fall out historically. And so I think us winning those titles at the same time helped to destroy that, probably not completely, but it helped to erode it, at least. In that, I remember winning Miss USA. It was, I think, 2 or 3 days after the Miss Teen USA pageant. And, those competitions are both run by the same system. I remember watching my teen win, who is also a woman of color and has curly natural hair. And I remember thinking after she was crowned, there's no way that I'm going to win, because there's no way that this system, this huge, pageant organization is going to have 2 women of color with curly hair hold these titles at the same time. It's just not possible. And then I won. And so even for me, it was important. Even being a part of that history making group was important, because I had felt that way. I felt like there's no way that there can be 2 of us. And instead of there just being 2, there were 5. So
Right, that's right.
It's important. And I was glad to be a part of it.
Yes, and I see some snaps and some claps from your panelists, right? Because that's so interesting. Imposter syndrome happens, I think, for all of us, being in the Black community at one point or another. And so, Dr. Fields, I want to ask you a couple questions. I see you nodding your head and affirming Chesley's win and her history-making moments. And I want to speak a little bit about your background for our audience. You're an educator, you're an advocate for social justice. And I think a part of what Black History Month stands for is that representation of social justice, of awareness. You've spent and centered your career around positive youth development in social capital and social justice. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on how Black History Month reinforces positive imagery and messaging for Black youth.
Yeah, great question. Well, like Chesley said, representation is so important and it's powerful. That common phrase, seeing is believing, is so true on many levels, because if a young person sees themselves represented in positions of power, if they see themselves represented in their educators and mentors, and if they see themselves represented in the careers they're passionate about, then something magical happens. I mean, they believe that they can dream it and that they can be it. And in my world, we call this self-efficacy, that belief in one's ability to dream and achieve, right? It removes the ingrained thoughts that because you are Black or because you are of a marginalized group, that your dreams are too big for your identity. And not to be cliche, but representation matters. And Black History Month should only be one opportunity, right? Where we intentionally highlight the contributions of Black people in this country. Because if young people don't see it, then they don't believe it's for them.
Wow, powerful words. We talked a little bit about Chesley's first, and she had a few in her career, but you also have a first in your organization, being the first Black woman to be named full principal agent or program leader for the University of Maryland Extension for 4-H. And so, that's a wonderful distinction. I think in the youth development space, a lot of times there are some ceilings, right, in programmatics and being able to allow for more diversity and identity of thought. So I'd love for you to tell us what that meant for you to be named the first in your organization for the state of Maryland, and also to share how that impacts youth, specifically the Black youth that your organization serves, but also all of the youth that you serve.
Absolutely. And you're right. You find people of color, Black women in particular, certainly on the ground. We're certainly represented in youth development organizations as mentors, as volunteers, but rarely do you see us in positions of power in the youth development space or even in formal education spaces. Me personally, I have to say that I stand on the shoulders of greatness, because I didn't get to this position without a village, right, of love and support, and the ancestors and even the unsung heroes that have paved the way for me. So I don't take this opportunity or position lightly. And I feel, in fact, that it's my responsibility to ensure that although I'm the first, I cannot be the last, right? That would be a missed opportunity on my part. So I've had youth volunteers, 4-H members of our team personally share with me that me being in this role inspired them or shifted the narrative of who 4-H is and is not for, because there are many in my state and in our country who feel like 4-H is not the space for them because of how we were formed and because who we have historically served or excluded from our programs. So I hope that my presence reassures young people that no matter what neighborhood you come from or what interest areas you might have or what your passion is, that 4-H is a place where they can feel a sense of belonging. And the 4-H Youth Development Program is such a powerful one because it's connected to every state's land grant institution. So every county and city across our country has a 4-H program. What a huge tool, right? A powerful tool to have a connection across the country if you join the 4-H program and engage with 4-H. So from my perspective, it would be irresponsible of us, right, in our program to not make this resource available to every child, because you can be connected to universities, you can be connected to mentors, potential jobs, and caring adults across our country and in many countries across the world. So this resource and program is really powerful and important for youth, particularly those that have limited access to resources and opportunity, and particularly those who have not been exposed to colleges and careers, because this might be their first introduction, their first course in a university experience.
Oh, you're so inspiring and empowering. And it sounds a lot like what Big Brothers Big Sisters of America stands for. And you said, you stand on the shoulders of some unsung heroes. I think that's Black History Month embodied. So thank you for those words. And so I want to have our leader of Big Brothers Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, the first Black leader of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, Artis Stevens, join the conversation. Yes, we have to celebrate that, right? And as Dr. Field said, the first, but hopefully not the last. That stayed with me. So Artis, how do you see your role being the first Black leader of Big Brothers Big Sisters, modeling representation for the greater philanthropic world that we are a part of?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Tanya. And first, let me just say how excited and proud I am to be on this panel with Chesley and Dr. Fields, two phenomenal leaders, two phenomenal thinkers, and just to have the opportunity and so to be in this discussion with the two of them, it's just amazing for me. So that right there is a significant honor. Here's what I'll say about becoming the first Black CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. When I was young, I used to walk into church, and what I would see in church was Black folks leading. And I saw my dad leading, right? Not just preaching, but leading. And God, I saw my mom leading and guiding. I saw others, family members, others who showed me things. It wasn't just the idea of ministry, but it was out in the community. It was the business that happened in the church behind the scenes when they were having business meetings. And I was a little kid running between their legs and doing all kind of crazy stuff. But I heard all the stuff taking place about here's how the financials work. I understood when we were getting ready to purchase a new property, the whole sense of what it took in terms of understanding real estate and some of the legal terms. And all this was a little kid. I didn't have any idea what was going on, but I heard all these things going on, taking place. And Black folks have these conversations. When I went outside in other places, I didn't see that, right? I didn't see that type of representation. I didn't see the types of conversations that were taking place because where I grew up, that wasn't the types of things that were going on, right? We didn't have all the businesses. We didn't have all the different types of things where you as a young person could see that and could have access. So what I got, a lot of other kids were not getting because they never had the access or the connection to see those types of experiences. I saw it when I went into my youth development program when I was a kid and I was growing up. And I saw Black men being mentors, right? Something that in our community, we didn't always see a lot of. But in that environment, I saw it and I had that connection to it. I saw it when I played sports, right? And had the idea of exposure to Black coaches who had to create game plans and lead and guide and develop. The reason why I'm sharing all of those stories about my upbringing and my childhood is because it's so critically important that young people see it, that they get access to it, that they get exposure to it, and they have the ability to engage with it, right? So when you ask me about the question of this role and the representation of the philanthropic community, it is imperative that there are more people that look like the people in this call, in this Zoom call, that have leadership positions and leadership positions that are not only the positions that go up, but positions that go broad. And here's what I mean by that. So I'm going to give you history on the sense of the philanthropic space here. In a lot of areas in which we work in, particularly because in a lot of areas, particularly given the human services area, that there's the disproportionate effect on communities of color, right? So when you think about health, education disparities, economic disparities. So the organizations that have been created, historical organizations like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, 4-H, Boys and Girls Clubs of America, were all created with a system and approach to sort of help in times of need, right? To help young people, communities to develop. You fast forward 100 years later, as I mentioned, there's this disproportionate effect on communities of color. However, what hasn't changed as fast in terms of the evolution of these organizations are people that look like the communities that they serve, right? So what you have is a legacy of organizations that have been continued to grow and continue to develop and have had leaders in these positions, but not always leaders that look reflective of the communities that they serve. And that's really important for the conversation that we're having today, because you can have leaders that grow into an organization, and it should be more leaders from the BIPOC community, absolutely. But sometimes what happens is that you may have a leader that starts in a mission or a very programmatic phase of an organization, right? And then they grow in the programmatic side of the organization because that's maybe where they start. But what doesn't always happen is that that leader gets an opportunity to also understand the operations of the organization, the business side of the organization. Because when you understand both of those sides, you then have the ability to grow as a CEO, a chief operating officer, a chief fundraising officer, all positions that allow you the business side as well as the programmatic and mission side of the work. And the reason why that's so critically important is because for a real and true advancement around every scope of an organization, both the programmatic side as well as the business side, you need every reflection of people of color in part, as part of those communities, as part of those conversations and part of those connections. Too often it's restricted in one area. And that's what I see in the philanthropic space. It's restricted in one area where you see a lot of growth sometimes in programmatic sides, but you don't see a lot of growth in the business and the fundraising and the marketing and the finance side and the legal side. It is important to have 360 perspective when we have this conversation about the philanthropic space and really challenge ourselves in terms of thinking about what are we doing in terms of building the pipeline in our local communities? What are we doing to build the pipeline across our boards? What are we doing to build the pipeline so that we have incredible mission-based and programmatic people? But we say to those programmatic and mission-based people, you can continue to grow in that space, but you also have an opportunity because you understand this mission, you understand this world, and you're uniquely qualified to be a CEO. So ensuring that people have the track to be on that road, because a lot of the ways that we recruit in terms of leaders are the people that are already within our organizations. But it can't happen if we pigeonhole people and say, you're only the program person, you're only the mission person, right? If that's what the person chooses to be, absolutely. But if they want to have other opportunities, there's a source and a wealth of ingenuity that is right now in the philanthropic space, but it has to be tapped, it has to be cultivated, and it has to be developed to grow.
Yeah, that's so very true. Thank you for that, Artist. And so I want to also now ask you a question about, we've been talking about the youth, right? And Dr. Fields was also, sharing her experiences around the positive messaging for our youth. Part of what you shared was community partnerships and seeing what what your community contributed to your success and leadership. So can you share with us, what do you think the importance is of community partnerships and community engagement at helping to allow communities of color to thrive?
Yeah, so the power of community, the power of connection is what Dr. Fields said earlier. It takes a village. Right? One organization, no one person can do this alone. What we know and what we see and what's been evident even more during the pandemic is it's exacerbated the problems that were already there. This didn't start with the pandemic, right? The challenges that we're seeing. The social unrest that we're seeing in our country didn't start with George Floyd, right? It started hundreds of years ago in terms of what's been happening in our country and the establishment of inequities in our country that's been lingering and festering for a number of years. So when you have problems that big, it's not going to take little solutions to solve big problems. We have to have big solutions and we have to have big partnerships if we're going to do that. That's why I'm excited in terms of this space and what we have the opportunity to do. That's why I'm excited to be part of Big Brothers Big Sisters, who I know is an organization that is connected in the community at the ground level, serving the young people who are most vulnerable, who are most marginalized, who need us the most. But that's why I'm also excited to have 4-H on this Zoom call, because it's those types of connections and relationships and partnerships when we say, let's put aside certain things, right? Let's put aside the idea that what sometimes stops us from the ability of the partner is the ability to think about, are we going to consume each other in terms of competition? Are we going to be worried about the donor competition that's out there? Because if this organization gets money, then that means it takes away from our money. Are we going to be consumed about the sense of our own egos at times, that we have to be the people or the person or the brand or the organization, and put center and put in the forefront what matters the most, which is how do we help kids? Because when you think about that, everything else then starts to connect, because we can think about a bigger picture of why partnership is so relevant. Because if you build partnerships the right way, there is no more than enough pie for everybody to eat, for everybody to enjoy, to everybody to consume, so that we do what we were all founded to do, which is serve more kids. What I'm also really impressed about is that the opportunity that's in front of us right now is to think about innovation. So if 4-H, for example, has an incredible network of curriculum, of content, of development, of expertise, of 110 plus universities, right? And one of the leading voices with our historically Black colleges and universities. And then you have Big Brothers, Big Sisters over here that's reaching communities. 71% of our kids that we serve are from the BIPOC community, has a unique mentoring model that's unlike any other in the country. Think about when you put those two aspects together, the type of magic that can be created, the type of community change that can take place, the type of wraparound services that we can create holistically for young people. But what it takes is commitment. It takes intentionality. It takes vision. And it takes the accountability to say, we're going to do the things that we know are most importantly to put kids first. And we know the other things, revenue, Our ability to get opportunities for staff and support and capacity are going to follow because we're committed to a bigger vision that donors, community constituents, staff, supporters can all get around. That's what I think the opportunity is for us in this country, to really create the type of broad-based partnerships, not just with youth development organizations, but with national organizations holistically across government, education, corporate America, foundations, and other philanthropists and influencers, that we can do some really incredible things that ensure that we're making an impact on young people today.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Artist. Thank you for that. I do want to ask Chesley a question, because I think part of our community partnership also is with our board members. And Chesley, you do serve as a national board member for Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. And you also are an attorney, and you were recently named for your firm the first diversity advisor. And so I wanted to ask you, why would your firm even need to have a diversity advisor? I think probably some in our audience, and myself included, would already think, well, attorneys, you've taken this oath to, be fair and impartial. But why did your firm decide to find a need for a diversity advisor? And what does that actually mean? How does that help with advocacy for youth? Because I know that is a passion of yours.
Yeah, well, for us, it was just a matter of putting our money where our mouths were, because it's easy to say, like, yes, we're focusing on diversity and we want to bring in and retain diverse attorneys and be able to serve diverse communities. But it's quite another to hire somebody and pay them a salary and say, it is your job to make sure that we're doing the things that we promised. So the firm decided to hire me because obviously we already had a diversity and inclusion plan that we wanted to implement it. And my job is to take ownership of that and make sure that the things get done. When I was practicing full time as an attorney, I sat on our diversity committee. I contributed to our original diversity plan, but it wasn't my plan, right? It was the whole firm's plan. And there was no one point person whose job it was to make sure that what we'd written down, we were actually putting into practice. And so, having, this first diversity advisor for the firm really demonstrated that the firm valued diversity and valued making and building an inclusive environment in the firm, because they were like, here's our person, you're going to do it, go ahead and do it. So I'm glad that they did that. And I'm hopeful to see more firms taking those kinds of steps.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, intentionality, right, was important. And I think that's what Artist and Dr. Fields were both sharing for their organizations, intentionality around representation and the right messaging, the right partnerships, be that with 4-H and Big Brothers Big Sisters, be that with board members, other organizations. It comes down to intentionality, putting your money where your mouth is, as you said, Chesley. Exactly. And I think that this series, we intentionally called it, and so Dr. Fields, this question will be for you. We named this series Race, Relationships, and Resources very intentionally to make sure that that was at the forefront of these kinds of conversations. So I want to ask you, do you see that race and equity need more elevation in conversations like this? And specifically during Black History Month, do you think that we need to elevate those conversations?
Absolutely, right? You can't discuss American history, her story, their story, right, without the Black story. You just can't. It would be an incomplete story. And we have to move beyond also focusing solely on our history post-enslavement. And that tends to be what we focus on in this country as well. We have to be more comfortable talking about race. And what I find is that youth really have no problem talking about things that may be uncomfortable for us. It's usually the adults that need to be more humble, more inquisitive, and willing to have those difficult conversations. And for anyone that says they're tired of hearing Black Lives Matter or about Black History Month and the importance of representation, I encourage them to take a step out of their privilege, right? And recognize that people who look like me have been inundated with stories, traditions, and images of what success and achievement looks like. And it hasn't been people that look like us on this call, right? So a month is not sufficient. Black stories and contributions should be amplified every day at the same level that dominant cultural identities and stories are elevated. So Black culture must show up in our curriculum. It must show up in our organizational and hiring practices, our community partnerships. The stories of our community should be at the center of who we are and what we do. And this will require us to be bold. I think for so long, we've been taking incremental steps. Most organizations have some kind of DEI plan or say that they're open to all or that they believe in equity or in opportunity. But we've been taking these incremental steps, and in order for us to really be justice centered, it will take boldness. We can't just continue to maintain the status quo, because then we are uplifting injustice, right? If we are maintaining the status quo. So this will require us to be bold, and artists and Chesley and myself, we're in this opportunity now where we can elevate Black voices, and we can use the spaces that we're in to make sure that this conversation is not just a document that sits in an organizational closet, but that it's how we do our business, right? In 4-H, we have curriculum on civic engagement, civil dialogue, social justice, and all of those types of things that we need to do more of. In Maryland, 4-H, in fact, we're highlighting Black contributions to agriculture, to STEM, the health industry, and our environment. So we have to continue to do more. And we can't say that racism and every other ism has no place in youth development. It absolutely does, because it has shaped how we do what we do. The education system, our healthcare system, and our youth development systems have all been impacted and shaped, in fact, by racism and every other structural ism that exists in the world. So it has to be discussed, and we have to make sure it's not just discussed and addressed in February.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And Artis, I'm going to ask you this next question, because Dr. Fields mentioned, justice activities. And in Big Brothers Big Sisters, we call that our JEDI work, which stands for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we're very passionate about that work. And so you referenced, the contributions of the Black community should not be just held in the month of February. And so, Artis, I want to know what you would say to our audience of why that is so important to continue for us to hold conversations, hold space for these voices and experiences beyond the month of February.
Because it's how we make progress. You don't make progress without facing challenges, without facing what Dr. Fields just mentioned, right? And that's the truth. And it's sometimes the ugly truth, right? You ever had the sit down with your kid, for those of you who had those experiences with the kid, and it's like there's something that's been bugging your kid, there's something that's been challenging your kid. Do you walk away? Do you ignore the issue with your kid? Or do you sit down and you say, tell me what's going on? Even if it's a thing that you don't really want to talk about, but you have to face it, and you have to talk about it because it's someone you care about, and it's someone that you want to make sure that things get better, right? We all care about our communities. We all care about our families. We all care about young people in this country. But we see things that are going on that we know has been an ugly truth in our country for years and years. And that's hard. Those are hard conversations, but they're necessary and important conversations to take place. I think there has to be the sense, we've used this word about intentionality, which I think is a really important word, because I think you have to be intentional in terms of our approach. So when we think about the work of JEDI, and you've seen a lot of companies talk about the idea of being anti-racist, right? That the sense of really being much more proactive, because it's the sense of saying that, no, I'm not racist. No, that's not enough, right? The intentionality is being, what are you doing against it? What are you doing to address it, right? Both in the sense of the anchor that we've always had in the Black community, but also allies, right? That think about the work that we can all do together collectively. What I've found that was most impressive about the response to, everything that's happened in this last year with social unrest was young people. Young people. It's been their voices. It's been their power. When you look at any movement across our country over the last several years, decades, even further than that, it's been with the impetus of young people leading the way, their spirit, right? Their ability to say, we have to change. This is not enough. We can move forward faster, quicker, better, do it much more effectively. They've been the agent, right? So that's what has inspired me and what I've seen. What's also inspired me that crowd, all the crowds that you've seen on the street, all the people protesting, haven't looked alike, haven't looked the same. It's been a multitude of voices from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And that's what I think our commitment is today in the youth development space, is that not how do we as adults come up with all the solutions to address the issues that we see in front of us. It's more so, how do we as adults create the platform that provide and empower young people to come up with the solutions, to put their voice out there, to think about what they can do to affect change. If we're doing our jobs right, we're doing our jobs right as mentors in terms of ensuring that young people are first, that we are a guide, but we are not the answer. We are not the people that's putting out here's how we should do it and here's how we should impact young people. I've always been the believer is when it's done most effectively, it's when youth voice is put first and foremost in the center of our work. And then we are there to help empower it, to cultivate it, to grow it, and provide the platform where they can affect change.
Yeah, and Chesley, I want to ask you the same question, right? Dr. Fields said, this shouldn't just be about Black History Month in February. It's every day because contributions are happening well outside of February. And we talked a lot about your work and what you've been able to achieve with all of your firsts. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, share with our audience. Why do you think that it's so important to continue to hold space like this for all voices of different communities to talk about experiences well beyond the month of February?
Well, I think if you don't do that, you're really flying in the face of the real purpose of Black History Month. We started Black History Month to honor and respect and remember the accomplishments and contributions of people within the African diaspora, right? Because they were previously excluded. We sort of erased them and didn't respect them, and so we designated a month so that we would remember them. And if you only use that month to rewrite history, then you've forgotten why we made the month in the first place. And it was because we weren't including these experiences. So that's really why it's important to go beyond Black History Month, because the whole purpose of it was that we would rewrite into our history books the experience of the Angela Davises and the Harriet Tubmans, alongside with the contributions of the Abraham Lincolns and the Mark Twains. So that's why we need to be relearning American history and the contributions of Black people even beyond our specific country. So I hope that we do that. I think last summer's awakening for a lot of people helped to educate them about things like Juneteenth, like the Tulsa race riots, like the Red Summer of 1919, things that I don't remember learning in history books. So I hope that people do, I hope they use the rest of the year to put into their minds that Black people have contributed to this country, that Black people haven't always been treated fairly by this country, and what can we do going forward to remedy some of the problems that we have here.
Yeah, those were some great final thoughts, but I don't want to leave our audience without one last final thought for all three of our panelists. And so I want to ask all of you kind of a question to get to know all of you outside of all of the stories and information that you've shared with us today. One of my heroes of Black history is an author named Minda Harts, and she asked all of her panelists at the end of her interviews, what is their favorite rap lyric? So I wasn't sure about your musical taste, so I didn't want to focus on rap. I wanted to actually, because we're talking about in the spirit of representation, right? And so with that, the theme around representation, I wanted our audience to get to know what would be a song. So Chesley, we'll start with you. If you could choose your anthem, right? If you could walk into a room and every time that song plays, this is your anthem. And you probably have some experience walking into some rooms with music, but probably didn't get to choose that song. So this is your opportunity to share with our audience. If you could choose an anthem that represents Chesley Christ, what would that song be and why?
Formation by Beyonce. I mean, if we're talking about heroes, right? Beyonce is mine. And Formation was particularly meaningful to me because of many of the lyrics in the song. I mean, she's talking about, okay, ladies, now let's get in formation. And so she's talking about sisterhood. She's talking about us supporting each other rather than constantly competing against each other or feeling like we're fighting against each other. And that was important to me. But even beyond that, there are other, lyrics in that song that were meaningful when she's talking about her Jackson 5 nostrils. She's talking about, her Negro nose with Jackson 5 nostrils. She's talking about being proud of features that are, her Black features. And, I think, in beauty spaces, Black features haven't always been, recognized and respected. And so now she's like, I like my nose and I'm not going to change it. In fact, I'm going to write a song about it, about how I love him. She's talking about, her country accent. She's talking about, having hot sauce in her bag. So she's talking about and being proud of her experiences that are specific to her being a Black woman. And it resonates with me because too often we aren't proud of our own experiences and we aren't proud of the uniqueness of being Black. And I was glad that she wrote that song. That's my anthem.
I love that. I love that. Talk about identity at work, right? And it was, huge worldwide hit. So I love that. And so Dr. Fields, we're going to come to you. Same question. What will be your anthem and why?
Well, there is certainly a theme going on because that is the song I would choose as well for all the reasons that Chesley mentioned. And then, the idea, she says, let's get information, prove that we have some coordination, right? It's making sure that we are working together. Look, I love being a Black woman. There hasn't been a day in my life that I wanted to be anyone or anything else. And I've seen so many powerful Black women in my life, from my mother, my grandmother, my aunts. My first principal growing up in New York was a Black woman, and she wasn't like this abstract figure that that was untouchable to us. I spent my lunchtime with her, and there's just been so many Black women in my life that have inspired me to be who I am. It inspired me to go to a HBCU where I can be loved on by other Black women, right? So Formation is, like you said, that self-empowerment song where you can be proud of who you are. And in the space that I'm in today, I made a conscious decision as I've kind of elevated in my career to no longer hide pieces of myself, to assimilate to what the organization felt was acceptable behavior or acceptable music or acceptable attire. I have been bringing my whole self, take it or leave it, to the workspace, right? Because I feel it's important for them to see what who a Black woman is, not just the pieces that you are comfortable with, not just the pieces that you think fit in. I think you all, who are around me should learn a little bit about who I am and be comfortable with that, just like others have been comfortable bringing their whole selves to the workspace and to youth development. So that song does it for me, and it inspires me and reminds me to not shy away from who you are as a Black woman, to be proud of all of the beauty and brains and history that comes with being a Black woman. So yeah, that's my song.
So glad to have a fellow member of the Beehive in this.
That's right.
Love it. Ladies, let's get in formation. Sorry, artists.
Right. All the artists is welcome in the space too. We appreciate our Black men.
We love you in the formation too, artists. And so what would your hype song or anthem song be, artists?
Well, of course, I love myself some Beyonce, so I'm right there with y'all. So let me just say that first. I'll switch it up a little bit. I'm still going to say in the genre of these queens, though. Mine, and I'll say it like this. I'm taking my freedom, pulling it off the shelf, putting it on my chain, wearing it around my neck. I'm taking my freedom, putting it in my car, wherever I choose to go. It will take me very far. I'm living my life like it's golden. Jill Scott, right? That for me, song exemplifies who I am as a person. It exemplifies the idea of what I believe about owning it and what I've always been taught about owning things in your life and taking your freedom, this sense of self-determination, right? That I think is so important in the Black community and the communities of color in general, that the idea that you're not defined by your environment, that you're not defined by the things that are around you or what people tell you or what stereotypes may position you to think that you are, that you're defined by your own mind, by your own heart, about the people you surround yourself with, about creating your own destiny. I'm taking my own freedom. I'm living my life like it's golden. That's me all the way.
Oh, what a wonderful way to end this conversation, living our lives like it's golden. Thank you, artists. That was great. And thank you, Chesley and Dr. Fields. I love Beyonce as well. And so, I will, since I asked the last question, I'll also share with you, my song would be from Alicia Keys, Girl on Fire, because sometimes, you have those moments where you just need a little bit of extra oomph. And for me, Alicia Keys, that song just seems to just be empowerment. I suffer from imposter syndrome every now and again, but that song, when I hear it, it just reminds me that, no, I can do this. You got this, girl. So for me, it just reminds me of like, no, I can do anything I set my mind to. There is no ceiling. I can do whatever I set my mind to. So I'm so thankful that you all shared your anthems. So now I probably will make sure that we share those songs somehow in today's conversation as your intro or outro, because I loved your contributions to today's discussion. And I want to thank each of my panelists, Dr. Nia Amani Fields, Chesley Christ, and Artis Stevens, for this thought-provoking, oftentimes fun and hilarious and inspiring conversation. Thank you for joining today's discussion. Thank you for watching today's discussion, and continue to interact with us on our social channels. You can follow our panelists on their social channels. And don't forget, for Big Brothers Big Sisters, we are on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and of course here on Facebook. And to learn more about Big Brothers Big Sisters, you can visit us at www.bbbs.org.